In this video, we're going to talk about the 5-number summary and some of the things you can do with the 5-number summary. All of the emphasis in this video is going to be in using the calculator to make this work as easy as possible. So you see from the title of this video, the 5-number summary, range, mid-range, box plots, and outliers. We're going to be finding all of those things by using the 5-number summary. First of all, we want to understand what the 5-number summary is. As you can see here, I will highlight this. The 5-number summary is simply 5 important descriptive statistics. Usually, you are asked to find the 5-number summary based on a list of numbers. These numbers are sometimes called values. In an aggregate, they are called data or sample data. These 5 numbers are the minimum, which is just the smallest number in the list, the first quartile. The symbol for the first quartile is Q1. It is the same thing as the 25th percentile. The median, there is no specific symbol for the median. However, it could also be called the second quartile, or Q2. It could also be called the 25th percentile, or P50. The third quartile, the symbol for this is Q3. It is the same thing as the 75th percentile. And finally, the maximum. There's a typo, this is just the largest number in the list. Let me just review a couple of these things quickly. The notation for percentile is P with a subscript for whichever percentile you're talking about. This one is the 25th percentile, which is Q1. This one is the 50th percentile, which is the median, also known as Q2. And this is the 75th percentile, also known as Q3. So I imagine you're now asking the question, so what exactly is a quartile? Well, that's a good question. If you had to find a quartile by hand, which you generally will not have to do, because the calculator can do it for you, you would do the following. You would sort all the values in your list. That would be step one. The problem would give you a list. You would put those in your calculator and you would sort them. Then you would count how many values are in your list and divide that by 4. So that means your list of values would then be divided into 4 groups, each consisting of 1/4 or 25% or 0.25 of the total number of values in your list. And then a quartile is a number that separates one of these groups from another. This is easier to understand by looking at an example. So take a look at this list of values, or this set of data. I'm just focusing on these numbers right here. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, and 35. So here you'll see we have 8 numbers, and we would say that n equals 8 in this case. We have 8 sample values. What we're going to, and they are already sorted smallest to largest, 2 up through 35. If we count how many values are in the list, we just already decided that was 8. If we divide that by 4, we then have 4 groups, and each group consists of 2 values. So here you can see I have each group in a different color code. So these yellows here, this is 2 that go together. They're the bottom 25%. 6 and 8 go together. They're what I call the lower middle 25%. 10 and 12 go together. I call them the upper middle 25%. And 14 and 35 go together. They are the top 25%. A quartile is a number that separates one of these groups from another. So putting aside the minimum and the maximum for the moment, and there you can see the minimum is just the smallest number, the maximum is the biggest number. Here are the quartiles. Q1, the first quartile, is the number that separates the top end of the bottom 25% and the low end of the lower middle 25%. So it separates 4 from 6, so Q1 is 5. And you're not going to have to compute this. I'll show you that the calculator will compute it for you. I just want to show you what that first quartile represents. It's the dividing number, the number that separates this group of 2 from this group of 2. The median is just like another quartile. Think of it as the second quartile. It separates this group of 2 from this group of 2, and it's 9. It's the number right in between 8 and 10. The third quartile, down here 13, separates this group from this group. It's the midpoint between 12 and 14, so it's 13. And again, the maximum is 35, and the minimum is 2. This is your 5-number summary. The minimum, Q1, the median, Q3, and the maximum, 35. Again, I'm going to show you this on the calculator because you don't really have to calculate these by hand. You can do them in the calculator. So the first thing we're going to do is enter these numbers into a list. So I'm going to come over to the calculator. I'm going to hit Stat and Enter, and that gives me my lists. The first thing I want to do is clear all the numbers that are in list 1. So I've highlighted L1. I want to get rid of all those numbers, so I'm going to hit the Clear key and the Enter key. And then I'm just going to start entering these numbers, and I'm going to pause this presentation while I do that. So here's our step-by-step in finding the 5-number summary. Step 1 is enter the values in list 1. And of course you can enter it in any list you want, but in this case we're doing it in list 1. And if you look at my list 1 over here, you can see several of the values are here: 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, and 35. Step 2 says do 1 var stats. So the way we do that is hit the Stat key, we arrow over to Calc. It's on 1 var stats, and that's what we want. We then hit the Enter key. If you have the old operating system, which is what I have, this is what your screen looks like. And we're going to tell it to look at list 1, and the way we do that is by hitting second 1. That tells it to look at list 1. If you have the new operating system, your calculator screen looks a little bit different. It looks more like this thing here. It says 1 var stats at the top. It says list, and it wants you to put something in there. It says frequency list, and it's ready for you to put something in there. And then it says calculate. Well, in this case, you're just going to type in L1, or second 1, for list, and you're going to leave this blank. That's very important. You're not going to put in anything for frequency list. Then you're going to come down to the word calculate. You're going to scroll down to that, and you're going to hit enter. And I'm going to enter on this one here. And now we will both be seeing the same thing. You see this on the screen, but look at step 3 here. Scroll to the bottom. You will see the 5-number summary. If you see this down arrow here, as long as you see that down arrow, that means there's more stuff that you can scroll down and look at. So that's what we're going to do now. And there you see the 5-number summary. They've got some X's in there, but it still just means minimum, Q1, median, Q3, and max. And there are the same values we had before. 2 for the minimum, 5 for Q1, 9 for the median, 13 for Q3, and 35 for the max. So that is all there is to finding the 5-number summary in your calculator. You will get some questions that simply ask you to find the 5-number summary, but you will also get some other questions that after you find the summary, the 5-number summary, they will ask you for some additional things to calculate. One thing you might be asked to find is the range. You see here it says find range and mid-range. Well, don't confuse those two things. Those are two different things. You can see here the range is simply the maximum minus the minimum. Well, if we look over here, the maximum is 35, the minimum is 2, and that's what it says right here. Maximum equals 35, minimum equals 2. 35 minus 2 equals 33, so the range is 33. So you actually have to calculate the range. The calculator will not show you the range, but it's very simple to calculate on your own. Notice Range is a measure of variation, which is also called spread or dispersion. And those different words address how far apart our values are from each other. What about mid-range? Mid-range is, although it sounds similar, it's range and mid-range. Mid-range is a different animal. Mid-range is the maximum plus the minimum. If you'll remember, the range was the maximum minus the minimum. The mid-range is the maximum plus the minimum and then divided by 2. So if you write it as a formula, it looks like this. Max plus min, all divided by 2. In our example, the maximum was 35, the minimum was 2. So using this formula, we would have 35 plus 2 in the numerator, 2 in the denominator, and the answer is 18.5. So that's the mid-range. The mid-range, as you can see here, is a measure of center, unlike the range, which is a measure of variation. The mid-range is a measure of center. Other measures of center are mean, median, and mode. Note, it is extremely important that you add the maximum and minimum together first, and then take that sum and divide it by 2. Many students would instead do this. They would just put it in their calculator like this, 35 plus 2 divided by 2. Because of PEMDAS, if you remember PEMDAS, the calculator in that case would first divide 2 by 2, and that's 1, and then add that to 35, which would total 36. This would be wrong. Let's make it much more dramatic here. What's the wrong way to do it? What's the right way to do it in the calculator? This is incorrect. 35 plus 2 divided by 2 equals 36. In this case, the calculator will do the division first, and then add it, and then do the addition. This is the correct way. If you want to do it all in one step in the calculator, you can, but put parentheses around the 35 plus 2 so that the calculator will do that first, and then divide by 2 and get the correct answer. So if you'll remember, we're using the 5-number summary to do 4 things. To find a range, to find a mid-range, and now we're on the 3rd thing we can do with the 5-number summary, which is to create a box plot. And the first thing you're going to do is just what we did over here. You're going to find the 5-number summary, then in order to draw the box plot by hand, which, by the way, I recommend because there are many things that can go wrong when you're graphing on the graphing calculator. And if you really know the calculator well, you can figure them out and solve the problem. But if you don't, you can run into problems graphing on the graphing calculator. It's very easy to graph by hand, so I encourage students to learn how to do this by hand. So once you have your 5-number summary, you then will draw a number line, and I've drawn a number line right here. It goes from 0 to 40. Well, how did I decide to go from 0 to 40? I needed to start the number line at my minimum or less, and I needed to finish it at my maximum or more. And I like to use numbers that are very easy to keep dividing by 2. So if I use 0 for my minimum and 40 for my maximum, I can just keep dividing those in half and making the little tick marks on my number line. And that's what I did here. First I did 0 to 40. I divided by 2 to get 20. I divided by 2 again to get 10. I divided by 2 to get 5, and so on. And then once I have my number line, I just pick the various points in the 5-number summary and kind of make a little mark floating above the number line. So my minimum was 2. So this little mark right here roughly corresponds to where 2 would be on my number line. This line right here corresponds to where 5 is on my number line, and that's my Q1. And you see there Q1. My median is 9, and this line right here corresponds roughly to where 9 would be on my number line. Q3 is 13. This line roughly corresponds to where 13 is on my number line. And finally, 35 is my maximum, and that's way out here. So once I make these little marks here, then I enclose them in a box. I make a horizontal line on top and a vertical line on the bottom, and now I have my box for my box plot. Then I simply draw a line from Q1 over to the minimum, and I draw another line from Q3 over to the maximum. And these lines are sometimes called the whiskers. So the full name is sometimes called a box and whiskers plot. And that is the complete box plot. You can put in these notations for the various 5-number summary if you want, but all you really need for a box plot is the box and the whiskers, and that is a complete box plot. And the last thing we're going to learn how to do with our 5-number summary is to find out if we have any outliers. What is an outlier? An outlier is just a number that doesn't seem to belong with the other numbers in the list. For example, let's say you were interested in people's heights. Imagine a classroom full of students of typical heights. Now imagine that one of the students is a basketball player who is 6 feet 8 inches tall. His height would probably be an outlier. So use this formula diagram to see if you have any outliers. So here you see an outlier. You can have a large outlier or you can have a small outlier. How do you know what a large outlier is? It's a number in your list, you look at your list, that is greater than this, Q3 plus 1.5 times Q3 minus Q1. You get all these things, Q3 and Q1, that's really all you need. You get it from your 5-number summary over here in your calculator. You just plug them in. A small outlier is a number that is less than Q1 minus this same thing, 1.5 times Q3 minus Q1. So you see the last part of both of these things is the same. It's 1.5 times Q3 minus Q1. Same thing here. The first part differs. This is greater than Q3 plus this. This is less than Q1 minus this. So before we go on, let's talk about IQR. Notice the Q3 minus Q1 in the formula. Here you go, Q3 minus Q1. Every textbook and every instructor calls that the IQR, or interquartile range. So when you see this formula in your book, or when your teacher writes it on the board, instead of it saying Q3 minus Q1 in here, it's going to say IQR. It means exactly the same thing. This extra notation, the IQR, confuses some students, so I don't use it. IQR just means the distance between Q3 and Q1, or Q3 minus Q1, and that's what we have here. So now we're going to use this formula to see if we have any outliers. And again, I just want to remind you, we are using this 5-number summary here to do this analysis. We're using these same numbers. So here's our formula. An outlier is larger than this, is a number, if any, that's larger than this, a number, if any, that's smaller than this. So what we're going to do now is to plug in our values into this formula, values that the calculator gave us. The calculator told us that Q3 equals 13. There you see it, Q3 equals 13. So I'm just going to put the number 13 there right under my Q3. Plus 1.5, that's always the same, that doesn't change. Times Q3, again, Q3 is 13, so there's the Q3, minus Q1. If we look over here, Q1 is 5, so that's a 5. You can do this in your calculator just like this. 13 minus 5 is 8. 13 plus 1.5 times 8 is 25. Any number bigger than 25 will be a large outlier. Let's look at small outliers. A small outlier is a number that's less than Q1 minus 1.5 times Q3 minus Q1. Well, Q1 is 5. Again, the calculator tells us that, so I'm going to put a 5 there. Minus 1.5, that's the same, times the same thing we had up here, Q3 minus Q1. Q3 is 13, Q1 is 5, and if you do this on your calculator, you will get negative 7. Any number smaller than negative 7 is a small outlier. So, do we have any outliers? Let's look at what we've got. Our maximum value is 35. There's the 35 in the calculator, and our minimum value is 2. Well, 35 is a large outlier because it is larger than 25. Remember, we said up here any number bigger than this 25 is a large outlier. We have 35, so it is an outlier. What about the small outliers? We need a number that's less than -7. Well, we have no values less than -7. Our smallest value is 2, so we don't have any small outliers. And that is the end of this